Hello, this is Geotech and today I'm going to be talking about the release of the Steam Deck, which is a desktop computer in the form of a handheld, primarily designed for gaming. The Steam Deck is running SteamOS, which is an Arch-based Linux distro, custom made by Valve. I'm going to be talking about the significance of this release and what it means for the world of gaming, the world of Linux, and in general, the world of technology. So let's take a look. So how will the Steam Deck take Linux mainstream exactly? Based on the initial reaction, it's looking like it's overall positive so far. You have big YouTube channels like Digital Foundry giving it a pretty overall decent review. Then you have other prominent channels like Dave 2D saying that they love it. And just in general, the consensus seems to be that the Steam Deck is exciting, has good potential, and the downside, at least so far, is that the SteamOS itself might be a little bit raw, but it seems that updates to it are happening pretty frequently. Then you have another video review by Linus Tech Tips, which is doing well, although it seems to paint it in a more negative light, at least in the thumbnail and title. Although when you actually read the review, he's basically saying the same thing as all the other channels are saying, that it's mostly good so far, but it's unfinished. And one aspect of this unfinished part is that the full Steam library isn't there on day one. But I don't think that's actually too bad, because if you think of the Steam Deck as a console, the fact that there's already hundreds of verifiable games on day one is pretty significant. If you're comparing this to like the launch of a PlayStation or Xbox console, that's actually very good. And then you have other content creators that focus a bit more on smartphones, potentially coming out with a review as well. And the bottom line is that most of these creators have largely ignored Linux until now. I think this has the potential to get Linux and the Linux ecosystem on their minds, which will potentially lead to more reviews. Like, I imagine them reviewing the Steam Deck, and part of the Steam Deck is the desktop experience. So connecting it to an external monitor, you'll get to be using the KDE Plasma environment. And so all around, this is very good hype for Linux and open source. And the next step here would be that the Steam Deck does well or sells well, maybe 5 to 10 million units at the very least, enough to start making game developers target Linux, or at least make their games perform better on Linux. And one easy way to do that is by switching to the Vulkan API and really ultimately becoming less dependent on a proprietary graphics rendering engine like DX11 or DX12. That's going to make it possible for games to perform better on the Steam Deck. And then the next step would be that other game stores start officially supporting Linux. Although technically you can launch a lot of the stores right now through utilities like Lutris, but it would be nice if Ubisoft, if Origin all had their own stores officially on Linux, maybe their own clients. And then once this starts to be very viable for gaming, I think you're going to see a mass exodus of people ditching Windows and going the Linux route. For many people, only use Windows for gaming, and that's the only barrier stopping them from switching over. Now, of course, there's other software like professional software like Adobe Premiere, for example, that is not on Linux, and that may stop some people from switching. But again, if Linux starts to become more viable and the market share grows, I potentially see that forcing Adobe to releasing their software on Linux. And so that's how essentially Linux will become mainstream. Now, that does depend on a lot of ifs, and nothing is ever guaranteed, but that's sort of the path forward that I see for Linux going mainstream. And some people may say, well, what's the point of Linux going mainstream if we're going to be dependent on a proprietary store like SteamOS and bringing users just so they can use proprietary software? This is a fair concern, but I think if all the mainstream apps and games come to Linux, I think users will still benefit, because you won't need to rely on an OS like Windows that tracks you, data mines you, tries to shove Microsoft Edge or other Microsoft products in your face. And instead, you can be using a Linux distro that is entirely community funded, We can still continue to promote the free and open source alternative software and apps. For example, we can still promote users to switch to GIMP, but the bottom line is that users will have the option and still reap some of the benefits of being on Linux. I really believe the Steam Deck is going to take Linux mainstream. It's going to allow users to finally switch to an OS that respects their privacy, doesn't data mine them, doesn't try to serve them ads, and in general is just very pro-user. Let me know your thoughts. Do you see the Steam Deck taking Linux mainstream? What do you think is its biggest hurdle to overcome? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all next time. If you're enjoying my video, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, PeerTube, follow me on Odyssey. You could also support me on LiberaPay, Patreon. See links in the description below.